Okay, you want to take care of the got it? Okay. No, what did I do? I'm a klutz. Okay, ready? Okay. Okay. Hey, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Rolandi, and the assignment I have today is about the Electoral College, time for reform or its abolition. It's very timely as our presidential election, by my reckoning, is 53 weeks from today. So very timely. I want to thank the Larchmont Library for inviting me back. So what I want to do today is maybe spend about 20-30 minutes giving you an overview of this institution we call the Electoral College. It's not a school or a college. It's not a place. It's a process. And then talk about some history, alternatives, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. And I hope you'll all come away enlightened for it. My contact information is at the very end of this presentation. So if you would like a full set of slides, or maybe you have a question or two at the conclusion of today's presentation, I'll be happy to send you some information, because knowledge is power. And here's an overview of what we're going to talk about. And the main thing to remember is that the college, the Electoral College, is not a place or a school, but a process by which we elect the president and the vice president of the United States. This is a diagram, how it works. Prior to election day, the parties would nominate their electors. And then now we have early voting, we have in-person voting, and voters across the United States select, they vote for electors who in turn vote for the president of the United States and the vice president. I'm going to explain how that all came about. Here's some sample ballots to show you what I mean. When you go in to vote, you vote for electors. And this is what we will see next year as well. Now, why did founders who wrote the Constitution, why did they set up the Electoral College? Okay, and the word college from the Latin means collegium, a gathering of notables for some particular purpose. The Constitution is a bundle of compromises. So the founders, when they were writing the document, they weren't sure how they were going to elect the president. They all had in the back of their mind that George Washington would be the first president, but how to do it was some debate. So some of the delegates to the convention said, we will elect the president by a direct vote of the people. Now, the people back then were persons who were white males, 21 years of age, and owned property. Now, of course, the suffrage, the right to vote has been extended considerably since then. That was one view. Another view said that the president should be selected by the Congress, and there were some advantages and disadvantages to that. So the founders settled on a compromise, and they said, we will have a body called electors. The people will vote for the electors, and then the electors in turn will vote for the president and the vice president. And there was historical background for that. Indeed, there's approximately 12 nations around, 11 or 12 nations around the world have that process. Countries like Pakistan, Ireland, Vanuatu, Argentina, which is having its presidential runoff election this weekend, abolished the Electoral College. So historically, we look at the Holy Roman Empire, which was the precursor to modern day Germany and Austria. That was an elected monarchy. There were 7 or 8 notables got together and they selected the king of the Germans, and then whoever was chosen would travel to Rome for the official anointment by the Pope. Our folks in the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See, the head of the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See, is our Pope Francis, who has been the Pope since 2013. We wish him all good health and Godspeed. But if he chooses at some point to resign as Pope, or if he should pass, then his successor will be chosen by the cardinals, of not rank and file Catholics. So that's another antecedent that the founders had in mind. Another idea, another thing they drew on was in the Venetian Republic in Italy, the city of Venice. And that person was the Grand Doge, who you see in the picture there. This gentleman was elected indirectly. The people voted for some group, and then that group elected another group, and then that group finally picked the Doge. That's what they had in the back of their mind. Okay. The Constitution's a bundle of compromises, so each state elects 2 senators, and then the House of Representatives is chosen by population. And as you can see in the diagram, how do we get to 538? That's that magic number. If you're a political junkie like me, you see this all the time. It comes about this way. Each state has 2 senators, so 50 senators, 50 states rather, 2 senators, that's 100. The House of Representatives, which is fixed by Congress, just elected a speaker the other day, 435 members. And then the electors for the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. is 3. That's how you add the numbers up. You get 538. Divide that by 2 plus 1, and you get 270. And that's what you need to be elected president. Okay, and here's a little diagram, shows you the same thing. So it was a compromise also that the states are equally represented in the Senate, and then in the House, it's determined by population. How do you become a presidential elector? And that's defined for you in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. You cannot be a current federal office holder. So if you're a senator or a congressperson or a cabinet secretary, you cannot do that. You can't be an elector, and the electors are nominated by the political parties. Or if you run independently, and we may have some independent candidates next year, they would then put together a slate of electors, and that would go on a ballot in each state. Question, are there restrictions on who presidential electors can vote for? There is no explicit provision in the Constitution that requires the electors to vote according to the popular vote of their states, although the Supreme Court recently held that the states may compel the electors to follow how the results went in their particular states. And there was a Supreme Court case, Follow against Washington, and you can read about that. And this came about after the 2016 election, because in the state of Washington, a few electors did not vote for the Democratic ticket. They voted for somebody else, and they were fined, and then they took it to court. And the Supreme Court said the state of Washington could compel them to vote the way the state voted. And this decision might have some impact next year. How do you win a state's electoral college vote? Now, most of the states, except 2, Nebraska and state of Maine, employ what's called a winner-take-all system. So if the Democratic Party gets 1 more vote than the Republican candidate in the state of Kansas currently, for example, the state of Kansas's electors entirely vote for the Democratic candidate. It's called one past the post system. Okay, some states allocate it by who wins a congressional district and whoever wins the statewide vote. That could be a particular reform if more states chose to do that. Okay. So the first elections were in 1789 and 1792, you see on the map there, and George Washington was the overwhelming choice of the electors, okay? And you're going to see in 1789, some states did not yet participate, such as New York, because New York didn't make the deadline to appoint their electors. I'll have you note some of the southern states had more electors than the northern states, because the way representation was determined back then in Congress is that the African-American slaves counted for 3/5 of white persons. That was changed after the Civil War. So you'll see Virginia with 21 electors and New York with only 12, even though New York had more people. Okay, it was one of these little odd things. Now in 1800, we had an odd thing that happened. We had a tie vote. We haven't had this since. What happened in 1800 is that John Adams, who had succeeded George Washington, ran for re-election, and his vice president was Thomas Jefferson, who ran against him. And it was a very acrimonious election. They didn't like each other, although they ultimately reconciled many years afterwards. So what happened after the election, and we started to have a party system, John Adams lost 65 votes to Jefferson's 73. But the way it worked back then was later changed, is that when the Democratic Republican, that was the party that supported Thomas Jefferson, when they met, the electors put on one piece of paper who they wanted. So a tie vote happened between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr from New York. Aaron Burr was the vice presidential candidate. Aaron Burr insisted under the Constitution that he be considered for president, even though he was running for vice president. So they had ballot after ballot. And a few days before Inauguration Day, the president was inaugurated in March. Back then, Thomas Jefferson became the president. So they said, we can't let this happen again. Okay, this was what you call a contingent election. We haven't had too many of these. It happens only if no candidate wins a majority of the Electoral College vote. So Congress then passed in 1804 an amendment, and we still have this on the books, the 12th Amendment, which says basically that when the electors meet, they get 2 pieces of paper, a ballot. One ballot says president, the other ballot says vice president. And that was designed to avoid the confusion. Okay. And that's what happened. Okay. Now, why this happened is that the founders did not anticipate a political party system, that we would have political parties. They thought you have an election, whoever came in first would be the president, whoever came in second would be the vice president. So we had that, we would have that system today. We don't. Joe Biden would be the president and Donald Trump would be the vice president, if you could imagine that. Okay. And we had the tie vote. Oops, I'm hitting the wrong key. I apologize. Here we go. What happens when we look? Okay, moving right along. So we have had about 60 presidential elections since George Washington's time. Most of the time, 55 to be exact, whoever won the popular vote has also won the Electoral College. So we're going to show you a few elections. In 1896, it was clear cut. 1920, right after World War I, very clear cut. 1940, when Franklin Roosevelt won his third term, very clear cut. 1968 was a little dicey. We had a third party candidate, a strong candidate, George Wallace, threatened to throw the election into Congress. He fell a little short. 1976, close between Ford and Carter. 96, President Clinton was reelected. 2000, we had a controversy. This was the famous election that took the Supreme Court. It took 35 days to settle it between George Bush, Bush 43, if you will, and Al Gore, who was Bill Clinton's vice president. And as you can see in the lower corner, okay, Al Gore won the popular vote, but he lost the Electoral College in the state of Florida. Bush won Florida by 537 votes. Controversial, decided by the Supreme Court. So this is one example where the winner of the popular vote lost the election in the Electoral College. And we've had it a few other times before. Okay, 1876, Rutherford Hayes won the election from the state of Ohio, but he lost the popular vote, but he still won the election. We had an upset in 16 between Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump lost the popular vote, as you can see, but Hillary Clinton lost in the Electoral College because Mr. Trump won the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And that has prompted calls to reform or abolish the Electoral College outright. 2020, not that long ago, Mr. Biden won the presidential election. He won the popular vote by over 7 million votes. However, I should point out to you, if about 45,000 people changed their mind before they voted in Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia, by about 45,000, Mr. Trump would have won the election in the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. So it shows you sometimes with a close election, a few states can determine the winner. And if you have a third party candidate, can shift votes between the two major candidates. This is what the map looks like 24 for next year. Now this map, you'll notice some changes in the numbers. The state of California is 54 electors. It's down from 55 because California lost population in the 2020 census. So did New York State. Conversely, Texas and Florida gained population. So if Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden face each other next year, as the polls right now indicate, Mr. Trump would start the election with a net advantage of 3 electoral votes because of the realignment of the electors based on population. We have to do this every 10 years because of the census. And this reflects people just moving around from one part of the country to another. All right, here's some arguments about the college. Will it ever be reformed? Some say we should do what many other countries do. Elect the president, whoever wins the popular vote, plurality, like in Argentina. Argentina, for example, will have a runoff this weekend, and whoever wins that will be the next president of Argentina. Many countries have it. It's very easy to understand. If you look at elections across the country for governor, for mayor, for county executive, whoever gets more votes than the other person wins the election. It's great. Some say if we have a 3 or 4-way race, and if no candidate gets 40% of the vote, then they would have a runoff election. And we have many countries, particularly in Europe, that have done that. That would be an outright elimination, abolition of the Electoral College, and it's pretty straightforward. It would require a constitutional amendment which is very difficult to achieve because you have to get 2/3 of Congress to agree to it, and then 3/4, 75% of the states. So we haven't had if you look at the Constitution, which I hope you all have, you'll see that aside from the Bill of Rights, there have only been 17 amendments that were successfully added to the Constitution. Now, another proposal to reform it is that each congressional district would receive its electoral votes this way. If you won a congressional district, you would get that one elector, and then if you carried the state, you would get those electors. So, for example, let's just go back to New York State. Let's go back a second. Let's go back here. Let's take the state of New York, which has 28 electors for next year. If President Biden probably wins the vote, the popular vote in New York State, under this proposal, it won't happen next year, he would receive 2 at-large electors. And then in the 26 congressional districts, let's say Biden got 17 and Trump got 9, then New York would cast 19 for Biden and 9 for Trump. Okay. Now, some say this is maybe preferred because it gets you very close to the actual popular vote. I don't think the politics would allow it because I can't see New York, which is an overwhelmingly Democratic state, or Texas or Florida, which are predominantly Republican. I don't know if they would want to dilute their vote. But Maine, as I said, Maine and Nebraska have it. Okay. Let me move along to some other arguments. I went back. I apologize. So here's a graphic argument in favor of the changing the college. See, California gets 1 elector for every 700,000 people. Wyoming gets 1 for every 1 because Wyoming is a sparsely populated state. Okay. Let's keep going here. Now, okay. Here's a cartoon. Now, this is an argument for keeping the Electoral College. There's arguments both sides. It depends how you view determining who gets elected to office. So in this cartoon, we see somebody, they're talking, I guess, after dinner. So one person says the Electoral College is undemocratic. It ignores the will of the people and it should be abolished. So the response is, well, you're crazy. Why would we want to do that? So she says, okay, we'll abolish the Electoral College if you agree to never allow judges the power to overturn the popular vote. They said, why would you want to do that? Because sometimes the majority is wrong. And she says, that's why we have the Electoral College. One should remember our system of government is not a pure democracy. We strive towards a democracy, but we are a constitutional republic. Okay, so that's an argument to keep it. I would also add that if we were ever to go to a 3-party system, I'm not sure the Electoral College would work because then you'd have deadlock after every election, and that could be another argument to change it to something else. Now, because of what happened on January the 6th, okay, Senators Manchin and Susan Collins of Maine proposed a change. See what happens after the people vote. You vote for the electors. The electors then meet in their state capitals. This happens in the month of December. The election's in November. And the electors then meet and they formally cast their votes in their state capitals, and then they are sent to Washington, D.C. for the official certification. Some believed last time, and in 2000 and in 2016, that the vice president had the ability to challenge the results from the various states. And Mike Pence, the vice president, believed that he did not have that ability. This law that was submitted by proposed by Senators Manchin and Senators Collins, tightens up this loose end in the Constitution, which now says that the certification will be automatic. The vice president will just preside and perform what's called a ministerial role. And the threshold for objections will no longer be 1 senator or congressman. I believe it will now be 10. Okay, so this is a tightening up. I think it's a good reform. There's probably some other reforms that need to be made. So the first time you will see this employed will be in January of 2025, when we will hopefully we'll certify the results of that election. Now, I just have some additional material here just to show you something a little more about the mechanics of the Electoral College, and then I'll be happy to field questions from you all. Here's a couple. These are the current nations that have an Electoral College system. around the world. India has it, Ireland, Nepal, Pakistan, Argentina abolished it a few years ago. Okay. Our turnout continues to be high. It was very high in 16. It was even higher in 20. We had approximately 160 million people voted. Some analysts believe we may see the turnout go even higher next year. Then again, some believe if we get the same two major party nominees, you may see the turnout go lower. I'm not sure about that. There is a lot of interest among younger people. Some states are allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register now so that they could be eligible to vote in time for next year. Now, third parties, we have a lot of them historically, and this shows you a ballot from 2012, what they would look like. So we've had the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, and other parties, and they get their candidates placed on the ballot by petition. Each state has different requirements. So you may have read in the news recently that Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West decided to forego the nomination by a more formal third party, such as the Libertarian Party or the Green Party. They're going to go independently. Can you hold your question till the end? I'm almost done. Okay. They have decided to go independently, so they have to petition to get on the ballot, and each state has different rules. California, I believe, if you want to have somebody else run, you have to give up your party affiliation and sign up with a new party. Some states make it very easy. Some states like New York make it very difficult. So it'll be interesting to see what other party candidates get on the ballot besides the Republicans and the Democrats. Okay. Now, there has been legislation introduced in Congress to allow the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., to become a state. It would no longer be called the District of Columbia. Well, the District of Columbia would still remain because it was increased by the Constitution. But if the law were to be passed, signed into law, what we know is the District of Columbia would shrink to a 9-block radius. And then a new state, the rest of Washington, would become Washington Douglas Commonwealth. And they would get 3 additional electoral votes. Okay, Washington, D.C. has 750,000 people. So it's a fairly large city and probably almost as large as some small states like Delaware and Wyoming. There is interest in Puerto Rico, which is a commonwealth of the United States, becoming a state. If it were to become a state, it would increase that by another 6. So conceivably, potentially down the road, we would then go to 547 in the Electoral College with 274 for election. This is tied up in politics. I don't think you'll see, obviously you won't see this next year, and I doubt you'll see it in 2028, but who knows? We haven't had new states admitted to the Union since Alaska and Hawaii in 1959 and 1960. So third parties do have some impact, most notably in 2000 when Mr. Nader, Ralph Nader, received 90,000 plus votes in Florida. Some argue he shifted the election results from Al Gore to Mr. Bush. There is some analysis now that indicates that where third parties tend to do very well are in the Western states. Ross Perot did very well in the Western states. I think he came in second in the state of Kansas, I believe, in 1992. So it's possible a third party could impact the results. Now, another way they could impact the results, if neither one of the two major party candidates receive a majority of the Electoral College, then under the Constitution, which was amended, then the House of Representatives would vote for the top 3, and the Senate would vote for the top 2. But there's a little wrinkle to this. Nobody knows about this. Is that if, let's say, it came in Biden, Trump, and Bobby Kennedy Jr., let's say Bobby Kennedy, say he won a state or 2, it would go to the House of Representatives in January. So we wouldn't know until January of 25. And the vote would be taken by state delegation. So California has 40 representatives that are Democrats. California would only get 1 vote. New York would get 1 vote. Texas would get 1 vote. Under the current counting or projection, the Republicans conceivably under this scenario would have a majority of the state delegations, and they could presumably elect the Republican candidate for president. In the Senate, each senator gets a vote. The Senate right now is slightly Democrat. So conceivably, you could wind up with a situation where you have a Republican president and a Democratic vice president. That's a contingent election. It has not happened in almost 2 centuries, but that's not to say it couldn't happen next time. There is a wealth of literature on this topic. I've chosen some books for you. One is about the 2000 election. There are many books on both sides of this issue. Jesse Wegman books came out recently, Let the People Pick the President. It argues for the popular vote option. And we have some other, there's never-ending debate on this topic. It's fascinating. And that concludes my formal presentation. Here's my contact information. And at this point, I'll be happy to entertain any questions you may have. A friend in the audience, yes. Okay, okay. Well, okay, there's a couple of advantages. Let me bring back the map here. Right now, if you look at polling, you look at the Gallup poll, I just happened to look at it this morning on my way over here. In September, they did a survey. They asked people how they identify. 25% said Republican, 28% Democrat, 43% call themselves independent. In other words, they're not affiliated with either party. The argument goes, and there is some people out there, they're trying to organize the independents into a centrist party called No Labels or Forward Party. If they were, the theory goes, if they were to field someone, they believe they could get enough votes that way. But what has happened historically, if you're an independent voter, you basically say as you get closer to the actual voting, my candidate's not going to win. A good example was Ross Perot. Ross Perot in 1992, at one point was polling second behind Bill Clinton. He was polling 25, 30% of the vote. But then most people said, wait a minute, he's not going to win. I'm throwing my vote away. So they ended up voting for either George Bush 41 or Bill Clinton. But Ross Perot still ended up with 20%. Now that could change. That could change. But we don't see right now, we don't see any recent historical evidence. But that's the theory. Now, I will tell you, if you go to state parties and local elections, we have had independents elected. Jesse Ventura was elected governor of Minnesota. Here in New York, some of you may remember in 1970, James Buckley was elected on a third-party conservative party ticket. It's theoretically possible. It's theoretically possible. It has not happened. Yeah, we have third-party candidates who win locally. In the New York City Council a few years ago, the current Attorney General, Tish James, was elected as a working family's third-party candidate. So that we have numerous instances around the country of people running for state office and local office. They get elected as third-party candidates. We have not seen that here. Although, that could change. If some of the polling indicates that millennials and Generation Z, I believe, may be inclined to support an independent candidate. You need a lot of money. I mean, last time, I think both major party candidates spent $1 billion with $1 billion each. You have to get organized in each state. It's a lot of work. I've done petitioning, and you've got to get people willing to either give up their current political affiliation, or if they're active in a Republican Party or Democratic Party, to give that up and run with this. So to restate, I don't see it happening, but it could happen. I hope that answered your question. Yes.
There's someone at home. Once the president's elected, does he keep that job for all future elections or just for the next election?
No, he keeps it for that election. They do get some allowance to travel to the state capitol. I think they get their meals paid for, they get their transportation, but that position ends with that election. Now, that doesn't mean some electors they do run again and they get chosen for a subsequent election. You don't get a pension from it. Question. Yes. Yes.
If Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico became state, what, instead of Washington, District of Columbus, it says Washington, Douglas,
Commonwealth.
Is that what the news is?
Yes. It would be called that because it's Frederick Douglass, who was a very prominent abolitionist during the Civil War. And I believe Frederick Douglass, who was a Republican, he was a staunch supporter of Abraham Lincoln. He lived in Washington, D.C. He lived in Brooklyn, New York, my hometown, for many years. He lived in Buffalo. Now, here's what they would do. This is a little tricky. People don't understand this. The Constitution we have the District of Columbia. That's the seat of the government. That would not disappear. They would shrink it to a 9-block radius. They would keep 3 electoral votes. Another 3 would be added because the rest of what we know as the city of Washington becomes a state. Now, there's been a strong push for that because if you think about what happened on January 6th, the mayor of Washington, D.C. did not have the power or the authority to call out the National Guard. The argument has been made that if let's say the current mayor became the governor of this new state, this new entity, she would then have the ability to call out the National Guard. Although I believe there is some legislation that's going to try to give the mayor of DC that ability. Now, here's the interesting thing. The little District of Columbia that would still stay, we don't know who would win that. So if let's say you're Donald Trump and you're living in the White House, you could get those 3 electoral votes. Because it's only going to be the people who happen to live. I mean, most of that night, if you're familiar with Washington, D.C., it is basically government buildings. It's the White House. It's probably the vice president's residence. That would still stay. But the rest of what they would do by Washington, D.C. becoming Washington Douglas Commonwealth, they would elect 2 senators and 1 member of the House. So the balance of power would change in the Senate. That's why some people don't want to do this. It's a power thing, okay? It would also change a distribution in the Electoral College. If you look at the last few years, we've had very many close elections in the Electoral College. Some would argue that the Democrats pick up an advantage to the expense of the Republicans. I think you had another question?
Others would have asked if somebody else wants to ask the question. Anybody else? Okay, then I'll ask the second. What was the rationale behind alternate electoral college in the last election?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Georgia. Okay. 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 Each state is permitted under the mandate under the Constitution to determine who wins those electors. Okay. There is a provision in the Constitution that has not been exercised in many years that would allow the state legislature to appoint the electors. We used it way back when, because think about it, not everybody was able to vote. I mean, women didn't get the right to vote until much later. So it's still in the Constitution, the state legislature could appoint the electors. What happened is that there were pressure tactics applied to the governor and the secretary. See, the Secretary of State is the chief elections official in the state. And they were certifying that Mr. Biden had won the state by the famous 11,790 votes.
No, 80.
80, thank you. Okay. This is my wife, Pilar Garoto, and she's she helps me with all of this, so including these slides. So Mr. Trump was trying to get the state to change the certification. The certification is required by the states before the electors meet. See, on election night or the day after the election, we get a projection from the networks, okay? We think Biden won New York or Trump carried Texas, okay? It does not become official legally until there is the official certification. And the states have to get this done, I believe, by around December the 14th, because that's under the Constitution, that's when the electors meet. You see, after we all vote, and we have early voting now, you have approximately a 75-day period, because the president's inaugurated in January. If we're voting in November, there's about 75 days. That's when a president needs to have a transition. So we vote, right? I mean, we basically determine it, but there's a few wrinkles now as we're learning. The electors are certified by the state legislatures. They then meet to cast the votes. They send those votes down to Washington, D.C. They go to the administrator of the National Records Office. They're the ones who hold the certificates. And then when Congress meets, according to the Constitution, on January 6th, see, January 3rd is when the new House and the new Senate meet. January 6th is when they all gather, and then they open up all the certificates. You can watch it on TV, and then they proclaim the new president and the new vice president. So it's a certification. Now, we might see some variation if, let's say, one party or the other does not like the results. They might want to go to the state legislature and say, appoint different electors, and we could have a problem. All right. So you see, there's a whole flow. See, unlike other, I'll take your question momentarily. See, in many, let's say England, right, or let's say they have an election for prime minister, right? or Canada, they know within a week or so, they have certified the results and the new prime minister takes office. We have this stretched out period. I hope that answered your question. Yes, sir. Okay. George, okay, good question. The question is, have we ever had an independent candidate elected to the presidency and the vice presidency? The only person I think you could call an independent was George Washington. George Washington did not belong to a political party. Now, he did align with the Federalist Party, but George Washington was not, he even warned against factions. So after Washington finished, he only wanted 2 terms, he wanted to go back to his farm in Virginia. Then political parties started. So John Adams was the Federalist Party, which you might say is roughly akin to today's Republican Party. And then we had the Democratic Republican Party. Then they dropped the word Democrat for a while because Democrat was considered radical. They called themselves Republicans. That was Thomas Jefferson. And then a little later, they went back and called themselves Democrats. Yes. All right. Small states like it. You're a small state. You're Wyoming. You're Nebraska. You're Montana. They seem to like it better than the large states. So you got to remember when they were debating the Constitution. See, originally what they were going to have one legislature, one legislative body, and they would vote. But then it was like a big family. Oh, the small states are going to be kicked around by the big states, the larger states. So they made a compromise. New York has participated in the Electoral College with one exception when Washington was elected the first time, because the electors were not yet appointed in New York. Okay, so but New York and the other 49 states and the District of Columbia participate in the Electoral College, because that's how the president and vice president get elected right now. Okay, all right, we have okay. Let me go. Yeah, I think let me try. Maybe I didn't explain that too well. Okay, 26. Let's go back to 16 because that's the one I think you all remember the most. Okay, let's go to the popular vote for a second. This was the final popular vote. Okay, according to this chart, who got the most votes? Hillary Clinton. Hillary got almost 48% of the vote. Right? No. See, there's 2 things that get reported or calculated. All right. There is what we call the popular vote. This is the tally of everybody voting in the states. Okay. Now, in 16, we actually had a couple of other candidates. We had the former governor of New Mexico, the Libertarian. He got almost 5 million votes. Jill Stein of the Green Party. All right. This is how the vote came out. All right. There were other candidates. I didn't really have space on this slide to show you all of it. All right. So Mr. Trump comes in second. He gets 46% of the vote. Now, in another country's system, you would say, okay, the person who got the most votes wins. Some would say it is, but look. We're going to have an election next week for mayor of Larchmont and supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck, right? So whoever comes in first, whether it's a majority, is the mayor of Larchmont or the supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck. We had a governor's election. Let me I want to make the comparison because a lot of people don't understand this. Okay, the only way you're going to understand it is history. Okay, the founders put this in because they didn't trust the people. This was a revolutionary idea. They said the people might do a dumb thing. They may elect an autocrat. That's right. The Electoral College. Okay. It is a gathering of electors that are chosen in each state. It's not a college. You can't get a degree from the Electoral College. It is an electoral mechanism. And they meet in each state, okay? They meet in December. When they meet, they have a vote. They'll have a big lunch. They cast their ballots. Then they're gathered together by the Secretary of State in each state. Those results then have to go to Washington, D.C. I'm going to show you a picture. Wait, I want to show you something that'll illustrate it for you. They meet in Washington, D.C. You'll see this picture here. The gentleman on the right is Vice President Dick Cheney. He was the vice president back in 2017. I'm sorry, 2005. The gentleman over on the left is Dennis Hastert. He was the Speaker of the House back then. And what they're doing, they have a joint session, a joint meeting of the House and the Senate. And they meet there for the purpose of certifying the election results. Okay? Now, when they had this meeting in 2005, it was cut and dry. Okay? So they received, you see these documents in the middle. This is the official certification document. I think it's from the state of Ohio. State of Ohio voted for George W. Bush. Wait. I'm going to finish the process, okay? So they had their formal meeting. Bush was declared the winner. What didn't happen January 6th of 21, we had an insurrection. We had a riot. There were people who were, police officers were killed. People were injured. There's about 700 people that I think have been indicted. 1,000, thank you. We had a riot. I don't want to get into partisan politics. If you were watching this my wife and I were in Bradley's and I was watching this on my phone. I was saying, what in God's name is going on? But there was an attempt to subvert this process because one side was not happy with the result and wanted to change it. Okay. So what happens on election night is, let me go back here. And if I didn't explain it, I'll happy to try to do it again for you. Okay, I want to go back to numbers. Okay. No. It's it is a different way of electing the president and the vice president. Other countries do many countries, the way they do it, they elect the prime minister by whoever gets which party has a majority in their legislature. We do it differently because historically, this is how the founders wanted it. What the founders did, it was a compromise. See, when they wrote the Constitution, there were some people like Jefferson wanted to give the people more power. That was a revolutionary. Think about it. Back then, they had executed the King of France. All right. We're going to have the president. We're going to have this position called, everybody realized George Washington was going to be the first president. So they said, we want to have a system that we think a majority of people in Congress, at the Constitutional Convention would support. And they said, here's what we'll do. We won't have a direct election of the president, but what we will do, we will let the people vote for these agents, if you will, call them electors. And then the electors in turn, the agents, will pick the president. It's an indirect system. We have had 60 elections since George Washington's time. 55 of the 60 times, we didn't have this result. 55 of the 60 times, and I can show you the maps and everything, the person who came in first won the Electoral College vote. What happened? What happened? We had a quirky situation. Okay. My own opinion, I believe Secretary Clinton, Hillary Clinton, got a little cocky. The polls said she was going to win. I think she took it for granted. So she won the popular vote, but you see, that doesn't get you the election. You have to win the Electoral College. Here's what happened. These three states are traditionally Democratic states: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Al Gore won them. John Kerry won them. Michael Dukakis, who lost in the landslide for George Bush 41, he won them. She did. As a matter of fact, after the convention, she didn't bother campaigning in these two states. She thought she had it in the bag. I got to tell you, Mr. Trump, he got wise. He got Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon, and they said, "Listen, we think there's an opening for you in those three states."
Why did you say election was
Went for 16 or 20. He lost in 20. He lost the election. I'm talking about 16.
No, because
He won in 16 because he won the Electoral College. Here's the vote. He got 306. She got 232. He won, even though he lost the popular vote.
But that hasn't happened to all.
It's happened only about 5 times.
Very small.
But what's happened in this century, we had it in 2000, we had it in 2016. If you believe the polls right now, and I really look at these just as a snapshot, it could happen again. It's because you see what happens when you have 2 candidates that are very close. This happens, okay? When you have 2. If you have a 3rd candidate in the race, now here's what happened in Florida. In 2000, Mr. Nader got 100,000 votes. President Bush, George Bush, only won the state by 537 votes. See, here's some people are afraid if you have a strong and funny candidate, what might happen, although I'm not sure. Some people say if you have Bobby Kennedy Jr. and he gets 10%, he may swing the election to Trump. Although there are some that are arguing that his appeal is to Republicans too, he might swing the election to Biden because of the Electoral College. If we didn't have the Electoral College, so the argument goes, if we didn't have the Electoral College, you would go by straight popular vote, which is what we have in every other election in the United States. I'm going to tell you where I think there's a problem with it. No, I think here's what happens now, okay? If I were advising one of the candidates, I'd say, look, let me see if I can show you. This is a problem, okay? If I'm advising Joe Biden, I would say, Mr. President, don't waste a lot of time. Hope there's nobody here from Texas in front. Don't waste a lot of time here. These are Republican states. Just go there to raise money. But don't put campaign resources. Where you want to put the resources is the Midwest. That's going to probably decide next year's election. If you're Donald Trump, don't bother in New York. Don't go to New York. Don't go to California because you're not going to win them. Go there to raise money. That's the Electoral College. Now, if we had a straight popular vote, I'm running for president. I got a campaign here. I got a campaign here. Campaign here. Campaign here. Why? Because I really would like to get 50% of the total popular vote. The other thing the Electoral College has done, it allows minorities, persons of color, to say, look, you need a certain state. Now, some say in 1960, John F. Kennedy won because persons of color in certain key states, like Michigan and Illinois, went for him because he said he would be a little more assertive in the area of civil rights, even though Richard Nixon had a very good record on civil rights back then. So some say, wait, so the argument for the Electoral College, some say, it gives certain interest groups a little more influence. You see what I'm saying? Kennedy won the popular vote. It was 100,000. It was the closest election we've had.
What
Yeah.
is the process if you want to abolish the Electoral College? What do you do?
All right. What would you prefer to see?
Popular vote.
Popular vote. Okay. We have to amend the Constitution. Now, there is a way around it. There's a workaround. If any of you are active with the League of Women Voters or familiar with the League of Women Voters, they have advanced something called the National Vote Compact. That's what it says. About 15 states have agreed to it. It says this. If let's say I'm in New York State and Joe Biden wins New York State. Okay, with me so far. But Donald Trump wins the popular vote next year. Under the National Compact proposal, New York would vote for the winner of the popular vote. It hasn't become effective yet. They need about 5 or 6 more states. That's a workaround. They could do it that way. But if you want to go to a straight popular vote, up or down, the Constitution has to be amended, which is very difficult to do right now. It's very hard because you see the Constitution's not easily amended. Just think about the last couple of amendments we had. And I identify with this when we had the Vietnam War going on full blast. I had to register for the draft 5 days after I turned 18. Okay? Yeah. But what they did was the slogan was, if you're old enough to fight, you should be old enough to vote. Now, prior to 1972, okay, only people who were 21 and older could vote. The Constitution was changed in recognition of the fact that young men were being called up to fight. Okay, now I identified with that. If I have to, I'm going to serve my country in warfare, I ought to have some say on who the chief executive should be. We changed it for that, for example. We changed it after the Civil War, because after the Civil War, African Americans did not have equal status. We had to amend the Constitution, all right, because of discrimination. Here, women did not have the right to vote until the Constitution was amended in 1920. Because legally, our legal system comes from England, our mother country, our mother tongue. Okay, English common law. I'm going back centuries. This is true. This is not political mumbo jumbo, fake news. Okay, in law, in common law, women did not have rights. A woman could not sign a contract. A woman could not divorce her husband.
That's true.
Okay, all right, fine. But that was the law. Look, you got to go back to 1789, what the world looked like back then. We were the only country, we were starting out, and we're calling ourselves a democratic republic. This was radical. Look at Germany, they had kings. England had a king, right? So when the people who wrote the Constitution were lawyers, like people like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. They were trained in the English system, so they adopted it as it was. See, if you read the Constitution, our preamble, we have our Constitution to form a more perfect union. It wasn't perfect back then. It's not perfect yet today. That's why the Constitution has been amended. Women got the right to vote. Women were helping. Women were doing a lot of stuff in the war effort in World War I. And they said, it's time for women, give them the right to vote. There's an equal rights amendment. It may yet pass, because in some areas of the law, women still are not equal to men in some areas. So the Constitution gets amended sometimes when there's a big uproar, there's a big push to change something. I'll give you another thing, which is crazy. After World War I, we had prohibition. Okay? I am told we had speakeasies all here in Larchmont. The cops were busting everybody up here. They weren't busting people in New York City for another reason. They had to amend the Constitution. The Constitution said you can't drink. Okay, think how crazy that was. They had to get that amended, right? So if the people want this changed, all right, they have to lobby for it, get their representatives in Congress to vote for it, and then they got to lobby the states to change it. Well, yeah. Well, they make it. That's why we've only had 27 amendments to the Constitution since 1789, or 1787. I'm sorry, 1787. We make it difficult. I mean, there's a whole bunch of all kinds of amendments. We had an amendment once. They wanted the country to vote on whether or not we'd go to war with another country. Now it's impractical, so that didn't go anywhere. I think I saw another hand. Or do we have any questions?
Just some comments on some of these things. 50 years ago, policy which
Okay.
So it's really hard to remember the Constitution, especially on this side of getting the elector may not be listed in the ballot, but we're technically voting for elector candidates. But the role of actually reading the polls at one and the push.
Yeah. Okay. There is a power. There's a power aspect here. Some of the smaller states, which are mostly red states, believe their power would be diluted if we went to a popular vote system, a pure popular vote system. So there's an element of politics here. Power. It's power. Powers. So, but the founders said you need 3/4 of the states. So you can have something called tyranny of the majority. If you said a majority of the states could change the Constitution, 26 states could say, I don't know, pick something. Everybody's got to drink liquor on a Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock in the evening. But if a majority vote for that, that becomes the law. That's crazy. So we have a requirement of 3/4 of the states. If the people want this, then it'll go into the Constitution. Yeah, sure. So that's what happened. So the only third party, we've had two strong third party candidates in my lifetime. In 1968, when George Wallace ran, George Wallace carried 5 states here. He almost threw the elections to the House of Representatives. Because they were afraid Nixon, either Nixon or Humphrey were gonna get a majority. So there was a big push. Birch Bayh had hearings. Senator Birch Bayh from Indiana, he had hearings, like they came very close to changing it.
I just want to go back. Why was Donald Trump claiming that he said the election was so productive? Why do you think he should have won?
Because he thought he won. But as now, look. I mean, look, you know what this reminds me of? If I ran for student council president, I lost, right? So I go and complain, it's called sour grapes, I lost. I'm gonna tell you something, all right? Because I watched this. I could show you an analysis that the Libertarian Party received 2 million votes for president. And you know where they got a lot of their votes? Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin. Libertarians are very free market oriented. Now you could argue if they weren't on the ballot, they might have voted for Trump and he would have won. I think it's sour grapes. If you want to see a detailed analysis that was done by several conservative Republican judges and lawyers, it's called lost, not stolen. He lost, period. Get over it. But here's the but. Many of his followers believe, look, and I know a lot of his followers. I know some of them. They're good people. They're alienated. They're upset with what they see, and they see him as their champion, and they believe in their heart. See, the Bible says if you harden your hearts, you can't open up your mind. They believe he was stolen. If the election was stolen out from under him. But I'm going to tell you, were there irregularities? There were some irregularities, sure, but it wasn't material enough to change the outcome.
People say John Biden is the top plus.
No, the polling, no, they're about equal. They're about 40% equal. Look at the polls. Question.
Yeah.
Gentleman in the back.
Changing popular, one of the key things. Local elections, and state elections.
Yeah, well, my career was in state and local government. And I'm going to tell you one thing I found very fulfilling. You see the people you're helping. You're right. This is, really in our system, you really start from the bottom up and you really have to start with like school board elections, town council, state legislature, Congress. That's where it starts.
Does the same thing apply to the mayor vote too, the popular vote?
Yes. I'm going to tell you what they do in some instances. If a mayor doesn't get 40% of the vote, 50%, they do a runoff. With the presidential electoral college system is the only place in the United States that has that at the presidential level. If you want to find it elsewhere around the world, there's about 10 other countries that have it. Argentina had it, they got rid of it. They didn't like it. All right. But mayor, governor, mayor of Larchmont, town of Mamaroneck supervisor, we don't use that system. We don't. No, New York does not. No, New York, no. The governor of New York, she was elected by more votes than the next candidate. Well, every state is in the Electoral College. Every state under the Constitution participates in the Electoral College. That's how that works. That has not changed. I think what's happened in the last 2 or 3 elections, the winner of the popular vote didn't get the election. And that's what some people are scratching their head and say, this makes no sense. But if you look at the history, I think it's easier to understand. Do we have any other questions on the phone?